Hello, friends. I'm Professor Filip Kovacevic, and this is the 24th edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. Since in every edition so far I've covered 5 stories, after this edition is recorded, I will have covered exactly 120 front-page news stories from major Russian newspapers. Neither I nor Newsbud would have been able to do this without your support. And so, thank you very much. Now, let's go into what we do here and let's look at the front page news in major Russian newspapers this week. What is the political mood in the Kremlin and in Russia in general? First today, let's take a look at the front page of Izvestia, the moderate government newspaper, the edition for March the 10th, 2017. On the bottom of the front page, there is an article with the title, "The Agreement with OPEC brought in $9 billion. The subtitle explains that financial experts calculated to what extent the rising prices of oil offset the losses due to the cuts in power in supply. There is also a photo next to the article. It shows a presumably Russian oil worker holding in his hand a half-full bottle of oil. The comment under the photo reads, "The cuts in extraction stabilized the oil prices." The article reports that the Russian Analytical Credit Rating Agency, AKRA, estimated that without the November 2016 OPEC agreement to cut oil extraction, which Russia also agreed to abide by, the price of oil would have fallen to $40 per barrel. However, after the agreement, the price of oil increased more than 20% and is now around $50 to $55 per barrel. According to Vasily Tanurkov, the deputy director of AKRA, Russia earned more than $9 billion due to its participation in the agreement. This is how much the Russian budget benefited from the rising oil prices. Tanurkov explained how AKRA came to the amount of $9 billion. He stated that the official figures show that Russia cut oil extraction in January of 2017 by 117,000 barrels per day, and in February by 90,000 barrels per day. However, the increase of oil price from about $46 per barrel to about $55 per barrel on average in January and February 2017 not only made up for lost income, but led to this profit of $9 billion. Tanurkov expected this positive trend to continue, which means that the Russian state will have more money this year to take care of the state programs and the military. According to the Russian financial analyst Dmitry Lukashov, the rising price of oil will also lead to the increase in the prices of oil products, natural gas, and coal, which will additionally benefit the Russian state. Lukashev stated that if the price of oil held steady at $55 per barrel throughout the year, the profit of the Russian export of these products would increase by 30% compared to last year. Other experts contacted by Izvestia, such as the economic analyst Anna Kokoreva, agreed that this was an extremely good news for the Russian economy, although they thought that the profits would be somewhat lower than predicted by Lukashev. It is interesting that neither one of the major Russian oil companies, Rosneft, Gazpromneft, Lukoil, Surgutneftgaz, Tatneft, and Rusneft responded to the questions sent by Zvezdia as to how they evaluated the present economic effects of the cuts in oil extraction and increase in the price per barrel. They all refer to the Russian Ministry of Energy as the only government instance authorized to provide comments on this issue. In my opinion, this statement demonstrates quite clearly to what extent the Russian government controls the oil, gas, and coal industries in Russia. These industries are tightly connected to the questions of Russia's national security and even territorial integrity, and there is no doubt that all important decisions affecting them are made at the top of the government hierarchy, most likely by the Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. Though there will be no return to the Soviet practices of the total control of the economy by the state, the Russian model of capitalism is very far and very different from the free market supply and demand model, which has been the core of Western economies. The economic liberalization policies of the Yeltsin years, which led to the handful of oligarchs running wild in their oil and gas fiefdoms, while ordinary Russians lost most of their lifelong savings, are held in such an utter contempt by the population that there is no way that any politician associated with them, or even any new politicians currently supported by the West, have any chance of making any kind of political headway in the Russian political life anytime soon. Now, let's take a look at the front page of Nezavissimaya Gazeta, the edition for March 10, 2017. On the bottom of the front page on the left, there is an article entitled "Washington Accuses Moscow of Deploying Ground-Launched Calibers," which is the name of the Russian-produced cruise missiles. The subtitle explains that the US is getting ready for a massive modernization of the so-called nuclear triad, which consists of strategic bombers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The article reports on the statements made by the deputy chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Paul Selva, during a recent hearing in the US Congress. Selva stated that the modernization of the US nuclear arsenal was made necessary due to the re-emergence of the Russian nuclear threat to the NATO member states in Europe. He directly accused Russia of violating, quote, "the letter and the spirit," end quote, of the 1989 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which prohibited the deployment of all ground-launched missiles within a range from 300 to 3,400 miles. Selva claimed that Russia deployed a new type of ground-launched missile, SSC-8, which is the ground-launched analog of the sea-launched Kaliber missile. The Kaliber cruise missile was used by Russia against the militants in Syria and proved to be very effective. According to the article, the Russian government rejected these accusations. Russia claimed that it did not violate the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty because there are no ground-launched cruise missiles in the Kaliningrad region, the Russian territory which borders Poland and is not far from Germany. The Russian government said that it was true that there were Kaliber missiles on the Russian military ships and submarines in the region, but these missiles are not subject to the treaty limitations. In fact, according to the article, 2 Russian military ships with cruise missiles on board, the corvettes Zelyony Dol and Serpukhov, have been relocated from the Black to the Baltic Sea. The article also reports that early in March of 2017, the Russian Ministry of Defense discussed the tempo of new Russian Navy frigate construction, the project 22350. The current plan is to build 15 such ships, and 8 have already been ordered, 4 of which are expected to be completed by 2020. These ships will be equipped with both Kaliber and Onyx missile systems. Obviously, this is not to the Pentagon's and NATO's liking. According to the article, during the already mentioned hearing in the US Congress, General Selva stated that the existing class of B-92 strategic bombers would be completely outdated in 10 years and would become an easy prey for the Russian anti-aircraft defenses. And so, my question is, what will happen to the possibility of a US-Russia détente? So many have expected Trump and Putin to meet quickly and make a deal based on common interests in the fight against international terrorism. However, as time goes by, more and more obstacles are being placed on the path of cooperation by the US NATO foreign policy and intelligence establishments. In my opinion, Trump's choice for the new US ambassador to Russia, the ex-governor of Utah, Jon Huntsman, who has been a vocal critic of Putin, as well as the chairman of NATO's chief think tank, Atlantic Council, definitely does not advance the cause of the relaxation of tensions between Washington and Moscow. As I have warned in a previous show, the Vice President Mike Pence and the Secretary of Defense James Mattis have already publicly contradicted Trump on Russia, and they wanted stronger pressure imposed on Russia to punish it for what they correctly see as Russia's rejection of the unipolar international order. At this time, it appears that their faction of warmongers is winning in the White House. Huntsman is the product of this same imperial political thinking. He is now one of the most significant representatives of the neoconservative foreign policy status quo and their insistence on American empire and policing of the rest of the world. This will not go well with Putin and Russia. The issue of the redeployment of nuclear cruise missiles in Europe is very serious. The situation in the Baltics and in Ukraine is so volatile that a rogue element in the NATO military and intelligence services can cause quite a lot of damage to political stability and peace in Europe. Things can turn bad very quickly and hit the point of no return. The sooner Trump and Putin have a summit meeting, the better. Next today, let's examine the front page of Kommersant, a leading liberal newspaper in Russia, which is frequently critical of the Russian government foreign and domestic policies. Let's look at the edition for March 14, 2017. On the bottom of the front page on the left side, there is an article dealing with the recent events in the Donbass in Ukraine. The title is enigmatic, "The Letters Which Turned into a Border," while the subtitle explains that the decree of the leader of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic, Alexander Zakharchenko, endowed the line of separation between the two warring sides with a new political status. The article reports that Zakharchenko issued a decree on February 27, 2017, which turned the existing line of separation with the Ukrainian forces into the state border. He decided to do so in the context of the continuing trade blockade of the Donbass by the Ukrainian army veterans and political radicals. This move is consistent with the earlier decision to take over the management of the existing Ukrainian companies in the Donbass. It is interesting, however, that even though the decree was signed 2 weeks ago, it was only yesterday that it became known to the public. In my opinion, Zakharchenko waited for some concessions from the Kiev government, but since they were not forthcoming, he decided to go ahead with the decisions made earlier. This is a significant political escalation in the Donbass relations with the rest of Ukraine, and as the article notes, Zakharchenko's decree contradicts the Minsk Accords. The article also notes that the decree contradicts the earlier statements made by Zakharchenko himself, one of which was made as recently as February 17, on the necessity of liberating what he called the occupied territories of the Donetsk and Lugansk regions from the control of the Ukrainian army and the Kiev government. It should be recalled that the present Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republics comprise only a portion of the pre-2014 Donetsk and Lugansk regions. However, with the decree proclaiming the existing line of separation as the state border, Zakharchenko seems to have given up on these territories. The officials of Lugansk People's Republic, contacted by the Kommersant, refused to comment whether they would also follow the Donetsk People's Republic's decision and declare their own line of separation from the Kiev forces as the state border. In my opinion, however, this will happen shortly as well. The article recalls that in mid-February 2017, Putin signed a decree officially recognizing the identification documents issued by the two self-proclaimed Donbass republics. The Ukrainian politicians and analysts contacted by Kommersant stated that Zakharchenko's decision represents a very serious attack on the continued viability of the Minsk Accords, and that the move was closely coordinated with the Russian government. In addition, the sources from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense could not exclude the possibility of further escalation of violence in the Donbass. In my opinion, the Minsk Accords, signed in 2015 with the aim of the peaceful political resolution of the crisis in Ukraine, have failed. Both sides are now repeatedly violating them. And so there are really only two options left. Either to negotiate a different agreement, which would perhaps be more realistic and reflective of the situation on the ground, or, and this is clearly the worst option, to escalate the fighting and try to attain one's political goals by military means. Perhaps it was this latter option that the Russian government was concerned about, and that is why it has tacitly supported the establishment of a quasi-recognized state status of the Donbass republics. Namely, if Russia fully recognizes the Lugansk and Donetsk People's Republics as states, then it would have a right, according to the international law of alliances, to come to their defense. This could definitely protect them from the Ukrainian invasion, because the regime of Poroshenko, for all its faults, is rational enough not to get into open warfare with Russia. This is because in that case, the Russian forces would have no reason to stop at the border of the Donbass, but could try to take over other portions of the country, especially the south of Ukraine, with the city of Odessa, where there are quite a lot of residents who would welcome them as liberators. However, let's hope that the cooler heads will prevail and that a workable agreement supported by the EU, the United States, and Russia will eventually be negotiated. This is obviously one more challenge for the Trump-Putin détente in the coming months. Now, let's go back to Nezavissimaya Gazeta, the middle-of-the-road newspaper, but this time to the edition for March 15, 2017. In the middle of the front page, there is an article entitled Marshal Haftar received support from the Russian bear. The subtitle explains that Russia intends to re-establish control over the oil resources, not only in the Middle East, but also in Libya. Below the title, there is a color photograph of the Libyan leader Khalifa Haftar wearing a Russian-style winter hat during his recent visit to Moscow. The photo caption states, "Based on available evidence, Khalifa Haftar remains satisfied with the negotiations in the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs." The article reports that following the military intervention in Syria, Russian foreign policy has intensified its focus on Libya, one of the main exporters of oil in North Africa. According to the article, Russia has established close communication ties with all the political factions in Libya. The president of the Libyan parliament, Akil Saleh, as well as the chief commander of the Libyan National Army, Marshal Khalifa Haftar, recently came to Moscow in separate visits. The article claims that the West is not very happy with this extension of the Russian influence in the Mediterranean. The article mentions the unconfirmed media reports that the Libyan and the Russian side recently agreed to facilitate the deployment of the Russian special forces from Egypt in order to strengthen the Libyan fight against ISIS. This would be the first time the active Russian military forces would enter Libya since at least the collapse of the Soviet Union, and it is no wonder it was denied by both sides, including the Russian senator Vladimir Jabarov, who is the deputy chair of the International Affairs Committee in the upper house of the Russian parliament, the Federation Council. The article emphasizes Jabarov's ties to the Russian oil business, as well as the fact that recently in London, the head of the Russian oil company Rosneft, Igor Sechin, and the head of the Libyan national oil company Mustafa Sanala signed a cooperation agreement. The implication here is that the Russian involvement in Libya is linked to the exploitation of the country's oil resources. The article also reports that Oleg Krinitsin, the head of the Russian military security company RSB Group, which perhaps could be called the Russian version of the infamous US private military company Blackwater, stated that his employees, who are typically former professional soldiers, have been active in Libya. They are assisting in the demining operations in Benghazi, as well as in protecting ships and coastal towns from the pirates and the terrorists. The article claims that even though the Kremlin has open communication links with both main factions in the troubled post-Gaddafi Libyan political space, it is clear that the bulk of its support goes to the eastern Libyan faction, whose military organization is controlled by Haftar. There were even reports that the Russians have made a weapons deal with Haftar worth about $2 billion. Be that as it may, in the last several months, Haftar has closely cooperated with the Russian military. He was on board of the Russian aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov when the ship was in the Mediterranean, conducting the operations against ISIS in Syria, and even had a video conference with the Russian Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu. Haftar later visited Moscow, where he met with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. According to the article, NATO leaders who support the other Libyan faction, the so-called Tripoli government, are far from happy about the growing Russian influence in Libya. The article reports that during the recent Munich Security Conference, the British Defense Minister Michael Fallon stated, quote, "The Russian bear should keep its paws out of Libya," end quote. However, he soon received a reply from his Russian counterpart, Sergei Shoigu, quote, "We don't think that in your zoo you have any beasts that can stand up to our bear," end quote. In my opinion, it is clear that on the wings of its successful intervention in Syria, Russia now wants to repeat the same feat in Libya. There is no doubt that the majority of Libyans are angered by what happened to their country after NATO bombing and the overthrow of the Gaddafi regime in 2011. That is why it will not be very difficult for the Russians to find loyal allies there, especially as the Russians have proven to be the committed fighters against ISIS, in contrast to some countries in the Western NATO coalition. However, the current state of political affairs, not only in Syria and Libya, but also in Egypt, Turkey, Greece, and the Balkans, demonstrates that this dream of total control by the Anglo-American geopolitical strategies will remain unfulfilled. Lastly today, let's take a look at the front page of the newspaper Vedomost, a pro-Western business newspaper, the edition for March 13, 2017. In the central part of the front page, there is an article entitled, "The Disobedient Websites Might Be Slowed Down." The subtitle explains that the Russian officials have been looking into the ways of making Google and other internet companies respect the laws and decisions of the Russian government. One of the methods being considered is slowing down the access to the sites. Below the title, there is a blurred photograph with Google symbol in the middle, and the caption says, "Russian officials are trying to get an upper hand over Google, which is ignoring the decisions of the Russian courts." The article reports that many foreign internet companies are ignoring the decisions of Russian courts, arguing that they operate under the laws of the countries in which they are registered. According to the sources for this article, the Russian officials are working on the ways to deal with this issue. They intend to propose amendments to the existing laws, giving the Russian courts the power to slow down the access to those websites that continue to ignore Russian laws. According to the article, the officials in question represent several agencies of the Russian government, including the administration of the Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to a source which asked to remain anonymous, the probability of these amendments being made public soon is very high. However, the deputies of the Russian Duma have not yet received anything through the official channels. Also, Putin's press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, stated that he knew nothing about something like this being planned, while the presidential assistant in charge of supervising digital communication, Igor Shegolyov, did not respond to the newspaper's phone calls. Still, according to those familiar with the matter, it is the ongoing dispute with Google that made the officials consider the implementation of these new measures. Namely, in 2015, the Russian Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, FAS, found that Google violated the principles of free competition by banning the Android cell phone makers from pre-installing the applications of its competitors, such as the Russian internet operator Yandex, for instance. The FAS fined Google 438 million rubles, which is about $7.5 million, and ordered Google to eliminate the ban. Google did not do either one or the other. This created a furor in the FAS, with the head of the service Igor Artyomov saying, according to the article, that Google will have, quote, a lot of interesting things coming for it, end quote. According to the article, Google is not the only foreign internet company that has ignored the decisions of the Russian government institutions. Facebook and Twitter have done the same, refusing to remove content found objectionable by the Russian courts. The most dramatic consequences so far have been suffered by the business social media service LinkedIn, which has been blocked in Russia by another Russian inspection agency, Roskomnadzor, due to what the Russian courts have found to be the violations of personal data protection rules. Whether or not a similar fate awaits the other Western social media companies in Russia remains to be seen. In my opinion, the linkages of these companies with the Western intelligence community, and especially with the CIA, represent the hidden subtext behind the new rules likely to be implemented in Russia in the coming period. It is clear that in the current climate of the geopolitical confrontation with the West, Russia cannot allow foreign internet companies not to abide by its rules and regulations, however self-serving they may be. And who knows, perhaps the Western social media sites may relent and begin respecting Russian laws and regulations. After all, how can they continue spying on the Russians if they do not have access, or if the access is much more difficult for their Russian subscribers, right? Be that as it may, as I mentioned in the last podcast, we are seeing the rapid nationalization of the internet and the end of the unitary World Wide Web. Just as the international system is becoming more and more multipolar, so is the internet increasingly being divided among the great powers, with each heavily controlling its own portion. Dear friends, this is all for today. Thank you for watching. Please support Newsbud and become a member of our community. And of course, be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor.
For just a small subscription fee, you can become a member of the Newsbud community and help keep this website running. Your subscription will provide you with full community access to exclusive content, including videos and articles from Newsbud's team of experts and analysts, as well as a members-only monthly newsletter from Newsbud's founder, Sibel Edmonds. Sign up today for full access at newsbud.com.